Is ALASDAIR MACLEOD from goldmoney.com. ALASDAIR, thank you so much for joining us today.
That's my pleasure, Elijah.
Now, you've talked about how really right now, it seems like we're seeing price inflation finally hitting in the United States. Even officially, the CPI-U unadjusted percentage for inflation for this last year, as of May, was 2.8%. So what does a actual inflation rate of almost 3% mean for the United States?
Well, I think it's a bit worse than that, because the first thing I should say is that we can talk generally about the general level of prices and whether that general level is rising or falling as a consequence of changes in the desire to hold money amongst consumers and also the quantity of money that's being injected into the economy. We can talk all about that in general terms, but you cannot measure the general level of prices. With the best will in the world, the things that you buy are different from the things I buy. You have a different level of prices and changes from what I have. If you go out to smart restaurants more than me, you probably find your cost of living is rising faster than mine, and vice versa. So that's the first thing I think we have to say. Now, when you can understand that, you can understand that it is perfectly possible for anyone to come up with almost any level of price inflation by just constructing the index in such a manner as to show what they want. And this is the point which has been made for a long time by John Williams at Shadow Stats, and he runs two, if you like, sort of price inflation calculations, one based on the methods that go back to 1980 and the other going back to, I think, about 1990 or 1992. Now, the point about the 1980 figure is that is now showing a rate of price inflation of over 10% and increasing. Now, so this actually, what do we believe? Do we believe 2.8% or do we believe 10% or 10.5%? And then you look at the Chapwood index, which is done, I think, half yearly from memory, and that shows, again, it rather confirms John Williams' statistics, because that is done on a number of urban areas, and each one is listed separately. You can go to the website, and you'll find that there again, most of the cities, most of the urban areas in America are reflecting a rate inflation for commonly bought goods, and that is the difference between the Chapwood Index and the CPI-U. And that confirms that prices are rising at around about 10%. So, I mean, the point about that is that if you have inflation rising at 10%, you have to ask how much do you deflate the nominal GDP figure? And if you're going to deflate it by anything close to that 10% level, then actually what you're seeing is a transfer of wealth from the private sector into the public sector. By that I mean government, and also into the banks, and also into the banks' first, sort of favored customers for whom they create credit. Transfer of wealth from lenders to borrowers, savers to the profligate, if you like. These are distortions which inhibit an economy. And if you turned around and said, well, does this indicate that the economy has been in continual recession for the last 15 to 20 years? I'd say yes.
You were talking about earlier in this interview that the Fed probably won't raise interest rates anytime soon, but you've also talked about, because we're seeing inflation right now, they will have to eventually raise interest rates.
Yes, that's true. We're living in a slightly sort of Kafkaesque world insofar as I can describe the situation in sensible economic terms. I can also describe the situation in terms of how the Fed sees it and how they're likely to react to the inflation numbers and other numbers, unemployment numbers, which, note, they don't produce. They rely on another government department to produce. So it's not their fault if the numbers are wrong. But what they do is they use those numbers and they use their judgment on top of those numbers. And you can see that, all this chat about CPI-U is up 2.8%. That's above target by 0.8%. But if the economy is slowing, then the answer is we can just put off any action to correct that rise in prices or that trend of rising prices for the moment. And that's the sort of situation we're in. It is a bizarre world where monetary policy is cast on the basis of statistics which are completely misleading. And it misleads everybody. I mean, if you go into Wall Street, everybody believes the rate of inflation is 2.8%. Ask them personally, what do you think the rate of inflation is? How you find your cost of living? Oh, God, it's going up and up and up, So, but they don't make the connection. They really just don't make the connection that actually the numbers that are presented to the Fed are, and there's no other word for this, lies, statistics and damned lies.
So you talked about in that article that really the idea of an inflation rate to begin with, like an overall inflation rate, doesn't really make any sense. And if you boil it down just to one number, it's not very useful for most people.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, apart from anything else, an inflation index trying to replicate the general level of prices is history. I mean, it's based on figures which are 2, 3, 4, 5 months out of date. And there is no way of knowing what you and I are actually going to be buying tomorrow, let alone what we bought today. That's not yet reflected in any figures, and it probably won't be adjusted for some considerable time anyway. So actually what we're talking about is a statistical construction which is just reporting something historical. And actually, unless we have absolutely no economic progress, no economic evolution whatsoever, it is completely irrelevant to today. So from that point of view, the whole thing is a complete nonsense. And in fact, we come back to this basic point, and that is that the Austrians have quite clearly shown, by the Austrians I mean the Austrian economists, have quite clearly shown that because the economy progresses, because it changes, it evolves, it is completely inappropriate to take historical numbers, however accurate or inaccurate they may be, and use that to define the state of the economy. It doesn't. All it does is it defines the amount of money that's been spent between point A and point B in time. And this is also another thing about GDP. People think that GDP represents something called economic growth. It doesn't. It actually represents growth in the quantity of money being deployed in buying the things that are in the statistic that they include within GDP. Yeah, it's actually completely meaningless in terms of an indicator of economic progress and an improvement of our economic condition. I mean, let's put it another way. If you go back to the Weimar inflation, 1920 to 1923, now at that time GDP hadn't been invented. That actually came nearly 2 decades later. But just imagine what GDP would have shown. It would have shown the economy roaring. But one thing it wouldn't have shown was the currency collapsing. Because sure enough, if you did the adjustment, let's say, it would take real GDP by taking out prices. Well, the first thing is whose prices? As we've seen with Venezuela and Argentina, the government prices are lies, absolute lies. In the same way as they are, I'm afraid, in America and also in Europe. It's just we lie less strongly. But the more the rate of inflation, the bigger the lie. And so, you can see that when you have inflation, when you have prices rising because the purchasing power of money is declining, then what you have is a situation where GDP can be shown to be absolutely wonderful, exploding, growing. But actually what it's hiding is people are being impoverished underneath. So it is actually a completely meaningless statistic. But we all rely on it, and people buy and sell things on the back of it and all the rest of it. So this is the world we live in. I mean, it is completely crazy. One day it'll end and people will see the light. But I suspect it will probably end quite violently when it does.
So what should people then look at to gauge the real health of the economy?
Well, there's nothing you can really look at because all the statistics are completely misleading. I mean, let's compare a situation where if you had sound money, then and absolutely no government interference at all in the quantity of money, and the banks were unable to increase the quantity of money because they would have to actually take in physical money in the form of gold. Or paper 100% backed by gold. They could only issue that to borrowers. Then you'd have a situation where there would be no credit cycle whatsoever, and you would be able to invest on the basis of, I think this company has got a good product, I think it's got good management, I'm going to buy their shares. You could invest on the basis that I want to buy bonds in this company because I think they are secure and they are paying me a rate of 2.5%, 3%, whatever it is, which reflects the natural time preference value of my money being away from me, and also the risk, the marginal risk on top of that of lending to this particular company. Now, under those circumstances, you can make sound, sensible investments. But as soon as you corrupt the money, everything you do is speculative. And that is why I just cannot find it in me to make any recommendations whatsoever in the current climate.
Now, I'd like to move our focus to the Trump administration, because you've recently written on this. You've said with respect to foreign policy that Trump is actually succeeding in bringing the administration under his control.
Yes, I think that's right. I hear all sorts of stories about sealed indictments and all the rest of it for people who have, cheated, lied, had their fingers in the till and all the rest of it in the past. And I think these people who Trump basically has now got on top of are the deep state, quite a lot of the Democratic Party, the people who, have really benefited from having decades of assumed right to government, which is actually what happens. Democracy is meant to get rid of this, but it hasn't in the case of America. It hasn't over here either. But anyway, the whole point behind this is that Trump, I think, has managed to get control over the deep state. He is getting rid of the people in the deep state by threatening them with legal action. Quite a few of them are resigning. He is putting people in who he reckons, whether it's right or wrong is not for me to say, who he reckons are going to be more responsible, which probably means more responsible to him. And he has now effectively got control over, I think, the situation domestically in America, which is terribly important because you've got midterm elections coming up later on this year. Now, I suspect that he is going to ratchet up the news on the guys who are stupid enough not to back off and are still in office, still there, fiddling the books, doing whatever, taking bribes is too strong a word, but if you like, benefiting from lobbying on behalf of banks or lobbying on behalf of industry or whatever it might be. There are lots of those people who Trump can attack. And guess what? His voter base in middle America, this is what they voted to get rid of. This is what Trump promised to get rid of. And there's a lot of naivety in this, let's face it. But I can see that this is likely to drive his domestic politics. On the international scene, he's now managed to can all this ridiculous stuff about conspiracy with Putin before he got elected, to the point where he's now going over and he's going to do exactly what he promised to do in his election manifesto. He's going to stop all this money being spent abroad. He's going to get Germany and Spain and Italy to up the amount of money they pay on NATO. Otherwise, they can go and take a running jump. And guess what? He's going to go and talk to Vladimir Putin. Now, he needs to do that because I think he's changing the world from this is my enemy to this is someone I've got to work with. And I think that's desperately important, and I think we should all support that. How it'll work out, obviously, we don't know. But he has overturned the whole of the American diplomatic ethos, if you like, the whole of the deep state's approach towards Russia and China, which has been antagonistic. Now, he's antagonistic with China on trade, but really what he's trying to do is he's trying to get the best trade position for America. Now, we can argue whether he's doing it the right way or the wrong way, but that basically is what he's trying to do. And I think that is an honest motive. So, yeah, I mean, this is very, very different. And this is very interesting because here we are in Europe. We're still behaving just like America did under the Democrats, under the the Obamas, the Bushes, the Clintons, and all the rest of it. The people in Brussels feel they've got a God-given right to rule us, and they have lovely lunches, dinners, and all the rest of it goes with it, and they are completely untouchable. We have this in Britain with Brexit. I know this is a subject you want to come on to, but we had at Chequers, which is the Prime Minister's country residence, she forced her cabinet to accept the establishment view of Brexit, which is not Brexit at all. It is continuing, if you like, with some changes in the arrangement, but we are a vassal state. Or as Boris Johnson described it, we will remain a colony of the EU. So this situation, I mean, we have got here what Trump has managed to make good progress in getting rid of in Washington. And I think that's a very fascinating thing. He's going to come over here. He's going to meet Mrs. May. And he's already, I think, sort of a bit pissed off with her, if I can use that phrase. And he's not allowed to see his friend Nigel Farage. That's definitely on the no-no list as far as the British are concerned. It'll be interesting to see whether he meets Boris Johnson, for whom he has a fairly high regard. But you've got the sort of news management which is fake news as far as Trump is concerned. I mean, is he going to waste much time with Theresa May? I don't think so. And I think the thing that's important is that when Brexit was happening, when that was definitely happening, Trump's view on Brexit was, good, we can do a deal with Britain. Britain is our friend. And, once they get out of this stupid EU thing, we can do a deal with them. We can, free trade, whatever, and I will push it. As president, I will push it. Now we're in a situation where we're not going to be able to do that deal, or they will be so conditioned by rules and regulations imposed on us from Brussels. This is if Mrs. May's plan goes through, that he's going to say, forget it. This option is no longer open. And that, I think, is going to come out of his visit to us, which is from Friday. He's flying over to NATO at the moment to tell them there. And, of course, everybody's shaking in their boots because they think, God, America's not going to, they're going to take money out and they're going to make us pay more. I mean, wait, what do we do? And then he's going to go and talk to Putin. And, of course, all the Eastern European countries are sitting there shaking in their boots, thinking, oh, my God, he's going to sell us out. Oh, and NATO's going to go. And this is not why we joined the EU and all the rest of it. Because remember, the EU is originally an American construction. It was put together by the American Committee for the European Union, which was a committee founded by the CIA in 1947. So this is an American operation. And basically, I think what Trump is saying is that everything that was done just after the war, like setting up the World Bank and the IMF and, setting up Europe and all the rest of it, that's history. We're not going to support that anymore. We're moving on.
No, mentioning Brexit, it's 8 months till it is official and gets implemented, where the UK actually leaves the European Union. As you talked about, there's been a lot of pushback. Theresa May's Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, quit in protest of Brexit. Do you think when it's finally implemented, it will be the same? Will it actually be the UK leaving the European Union, or will it be more like you were saying, the UK might still be like a colony or whatever of the European Union, and it won't actually leave fully?
Someone said a week is a long time in politics. We're not due to leave until March next year. So what's going to happen between now and then, I don't know. The only thing I can say is that don't underestimate Boris Johnson. Everybody over here does, because, we're a bunch of snowflakes, if you like, and we don't understand what he's talking about. But actually, Boris Johnson understands proper classical economics. He understands pre-Keynesian economics, Britain. And he understands, therefore, why the private sector in Britain should be encouraged to trade freely. He also understands that business lobbying, is actually very, very bad and should be discouraged. And he's made rather rude comments to that effect recently. So this is a man who actually, I think, has got a plan. He understands what he's doing. Now, whether he succeeds or not, I don't know. But we've got certainly, I think, three influential people who do know what they're doing and can explain it to middle-of-the-road people who haven't really thought about it too much. And that is Boris Johnson, Steve Baker, who was in the Department for Exiting, the Brexit department, and also Smog. Now, those three do actually understand, let's call it Austrian economics, if you like. They understand free markets. They understand why free markets work. And they understand why competition is so important in the private sector. They understand that tariffs actually, the best way forward is to come out of the EU completely, go onto the WTO basis, and hopefully just remove all tariffs, just take them away. Britain, tariff-free. And on that basis, if China or America wants to sell goods to us, as long as they comply with our, sort of reasonable safety and quality standards, whatever, then fine, they're completely free to do so. They understand that, and that is where they're going to try and take it. And I think that they can persuade those middle-of-the-road people who basically only move in the direction which they think is safest, if you like, safest for their own personal situation. I'm talking about members of the parliamentary party, the Conservative Parliamentary Party. Those people, I think, can be won over by a sensible, straightforward argument. And the point is that the Remainers have got no argument at all, other than this is the status quo, it must not change. That is not an argument. And I think that when the debate is properly held, you will find that MPs start moving towards, if you like, a more effective Brexit than the one that's been proposed by Theresa May. Now, the problem we have is that Theresa May can, come up with these wonderful ideas as much as she likes, but it's got to be accepted by the EU, and the EU is not about to accept even her ideas. So we're nowhere near getting anything worth talking about.
Now, last thing before we let you go, you recently also wrote an article about the EU in general, and you say it's in the state of decay, and that the whole system itself is really built on a faulty premise.
Yes, it is. I mean, it's in a state of decay basically because it cannot evolve. It's undemocratic for a start. There's a parliament which sits part of the year in Brussels and part of the year in Strasbourg, but the parliament has only 50% of the votes. It cannot propose any legislation. That is the duty of the commissioners. The commissioners will propose something and then they get it cleared by Parliament. Now, given that they've only got, the Parliament has 50% of the votes, all you need is one supporter in Parliament and the commissioner's got his majority. So this is not democracy at all. And this is why their attitude is that when you have a referendum, if the referendum produces the wrong result, have another referendum until you get it right. That's their approach. Now, if you have a proper democracy, then at least the situation evolves. Your institutions evolve. They have to evolve because it has to keep up with what the public want. If you don't have democracy, it doesn't evolve. And so we have this situation now, really, where the ECB in particular has allowed huge great imbalances to build up between the various national central banks. So in very round terms, the Bundesbank is owed roughly 1 trillion euros by all the other national central banks, and also, incidentally, by the ECB itself. Now, that's fine so long as you believe that this static organization can never change. Well, one day it will change, but when it does, it'll change with a bang. I mean, Greece they sat on very effectively, but that was a very small country. Italy is not so small. Italy is bust, the government is bust, it needs money, the banks are basically insolvent. Can you sweep that under the carpet? Yeah, probably. You can continue to do that. But this is the point. When a crisis hits, and I mean a proper crisis, a credit crisis, which is beyond the control of the central banks because it is created by the central banks, by their earlier actions, then the whole system is likely to fall apart. And it's going to be very interesting watching what happens to the euro after the next credit crisis, because it has effectively been fatally undermined by the creation of its own institutions. And the other thing about money is that the longer money has been around, the more credibility it has. The euro has only been around really since the turn of the century. It didn't even have the backing of any gold or anything like that. Its only backing were the earlier currencies, some of which were highly inflationary. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens to that. And I really just don't see this Eurozone structure and therefore the Europe structure surviving very far into the future. I mean, I think the next big shock it's going to face is the next credit crunch, which in my view is probably at the end of this year or at the latest by the middle of next year. Really, because there isn't much room to raise interest rates before, that huge, great mountain of debt, whether it's in America or in Britain or Japan or the Eurozone, before that collapses. So, we've got very, very little headroom, and I really do think it's not going to take an awful lot to collapse that. So, yeah, it's an area of big danger, and I just do not see a long-term future for the EU.